Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if you're new here. My name is Death by Pony. Today we're hopping back into our Derek DLC. Last time we had a little bit of an embarrassing encounter with Nico and talking to a psychic, but we already embarrassed him, so it's time to move on. So without further ado, let's hop into this. And back in we go. What was that about? George posed the question out of simple curiosity. He didn't give a hint of judgment or suspicion, but Nicholas reacted as if George asked where the last cookie went to his crumb-covered little brother. Nothing. It was about nothing. The total shutdown took George by surprise. He frowned. The biggest brother of the bunch took that as a sign to step in, saw a smile, and some almost parental words. Well, Nico can have his fun. We've all wondered about what might happen in the future. George, his usual placidity, returned after a shrug. He couldn't accept that Nicholas didn't appreciate any attempt at prying and focused on chatting with Derek about his own matters.
No.
I haven't. I'm not sure I want to know. Realizing everything about me and everyone else was entirely set to the point where each move could be predicted would make the world feel almost pointless, even if it was a good future. But what if it was a bad one? That'd be even worse. I'm convinced I definitely don't want to hear about my future. George nodded to himself mainly. He'd reasoned it all out in that chapter of conversation could be closed, until a low murmur came from the still drooping figure of Nicholas that left an ugly wrinkle across the page. It's easy for you to say. He hadn't been trying to join the conversation. He had made it crystal clear it wasn't a topic up for discussion yet. Nicholas was agitated enough about whatever it was to voice the contempt. What was that supposed to mean, Nicholas? Free of suspicion was no longer a description that applied to George's words. They were dripping in it. George's attention now on him, Nicholas coolly peered at his brother between the long, thick strands of his hair that dangled in front of his eyes. He didn't speak. Derek's characteristic grin strained under the rising tension he'd attempted to sidestep. He clasped his hands together and made another go at shifting focuses.
That's a bummer.
Nicholas really is getting older. He sighs a lot more nowadays, huh? The weight of the world is starting to get to him. That sucks, but there's no avoiding it as you grow up. Derek succeeded in getting George's icy stare pointing his way instead, but it didn't last. George watched him intently, only long enough to read what he could from his brother's acts and deeds, then came to some kind of conclusion. At that point, the middle Schwartz turned again to Nicholas. He didn't look at him. It was through him. Some things don't change even when you're older. George didn't grit his teeth or shout. There was a lack of feeling, a disconnect that was even worse than anger would have been. Nicholas' fingers tightened into a fist and sprung right up. He started into a brother face defiantly. He shook with an impromptu rage George lacked. George had been looking down on him, and easily still could even as Nicholas' full height, and added an extra sting to what younger Schwartz said next. You know what sucks more than growing up? Being the last to grow up. I'm the one who gets left behind. I'm basically an only child now. It's just me, mom, and dad at home. The flash of fury burned out quick. Nicholas began to crumble with every cracking sentence.
Not fair.
And the worst part is I'm probably just being annoying, right? The spoiled baby of the family who's always crying for attention. Of course adults have to go out and do their adult things. It's dumb to think people could do anything else, so I can't even talk about it with anybody. Nicholas's plight devastated Derek. He was ready to move heaven and earth to solve the conundrum of aging if he could, but George's features didn't so much as twitch. Did you really not tell anybody? It was callousness that left Derek speechlessness. He couldn't stop the days from going by, and he couldn't even stop his younger brother from being mad at each other. Nicholas and George Schwartz glared at each other unflinchingly. And what is that supposed to mean, George? You told Derek, didn't you? You knew how you felt, and I bet he knows what the call was about. What else would have been talking about by the pool? You can always talk to Derek, only him. George had said it all without saying it. He was accusing Nicholas of loving Derek more than him, and George hated it. Well, am I right? The staring contest ended right there as Nicholas hung his head down, dropping his glance to the floor. That was the only battle. The war wasn't over yet. You're so smart and somehow not smart at all. Unaffected by the insult, but distinctly frustrated from the lack of real answer, George once again looked at Derek. Derek's mouth had continued to hang open in horror, but he finally closed it. He, too, turned his gaze away from the middle child. He didn't have any words to offer at that time. George stood there between his two silent brothers, furtively turning from one to the other. They were cowards together in their same space, but seemed to be so far away. Ultimately, it was the lack of response that George took as an answer. All alone, right next to the ones he cared about most, George whispered bitterly.
Fine.
I knew it. The suffocating stillness exploded. Nicholas wasn't finished. You don't know shit. I know there's no need to have the three of us around. Derek is more than enough for everybody. Shots were fired back and forth with no ground gained on either side. I was literally 6 when I assessed over Derek. You can get over it already. I'll get over it as soon as you do. Nicholas thrust his arms wide open, caught up in the heat of feud and needing to take George down. He sacrificed his secret he'd held on to so tightly. Well, guess what, George? I did tell Derek about that call. I meant he can tell you about how I never ever mentioned him about the stupid psychic. I've two older brothers, not just him. I haven't forgotten that, even though you're so sure I have. When I asked for the reading, Derek was already long gone. I wasn't going to demand the universe bring him back. He had better things to do. Hey, that's not... Derek instinctively spoke out against the idea that his family was such high priority, but managed to hold back his tongue. This was between Nicholas and George. Neither could even see Derek amid their mutual misdirection. I wanted to ask how much longer I'd at least have you nearby. Maybe you'd go away after college, or maybe you'd stay here. I didn't know. But you might have felt bad if I asked you directly in case you were gonna leave. I didn't want to hold you back from going for whatever life you had in mind, with or without me around. And that's the only reason it was easier to admit it to Derek, so there. Nico's arms were folded defiantly as he mimicked the snide closing remark the psychic used to tell Liz off. However, nothing about him came across as truly satisfied. And he had to twist his face away to try hiding how glossy his eyes were, and Nicholas couldn't avoid the throat-clenching emotion in his voice. George was completely floored. Shock, sorrow, and relief fought for control over his face. It contorted with deep creases. You understand then why Derek had kept quiet about what happened. It wasn't his place to admit something like that, not on Nico's behalf. After a pained stretch of silence, the feeling that settled on George's heart was an Olympic-sized pool of regret.
I'm sorry.
Nicholas, I'm sorry. It was a struggle for George to speak. He swallowed thickly, his Adam's apple bobbing. He didn't try to cover how watery his eyes had become. You were right about me. I was wrong about you. I haven't gotten over the memory of being the odd man out. Even though it was years ago, that's not fair. None of it has been. George looked at the sky, getting lost in great expanse as his mind sank deep into the past. You and Derek have had moments that are only for the two of you. We're not as set. We're individual people. We have our own relationships. Though to me, it's always felt as if there's more moments of Nicholas and Derek than other. When I was a kid, I never thought I could win. You were clearly about whose company you were looking for. I didn't want to make things awkward by being a third wheel, and mostly, I didn't want to test the water to see how much I was welcome between you and Derek. I was too afraid of that. I was better to myself. I didn't need to be part of it. His eyes and hands squeezed shut. George was unable to face his brother directly. He still forced himself to continue. But as much as I counted myself out, I wanted to be included. I wanted you to say George was back when I showed up, or that you wouldn't go somewhere if I wasn't coming too. I wish I admitted that a long time ago. The stiffness over George's whole form released after he said his truth. His fists unclenched and his shining earth green eyes could be seen again. He'd let go for real. While George was a pillar of peace, his brother was the opposite. Nicholas vigorously scrubbed his face, transferring tears and snot onto his bare arms rather than his face. When he could at least pretend he'd pulled himself together, Nicholas spoke again with absolute conviction. I'm sorry I ever treated you like that. Back then and still now, all I think about is how I feel on stuff. Obviously, it was easy for me to move on as if nothing because I was the one getting my way. I stopped wanting it to be that way, and that was my closure. But now, you're the ones who have a good time while I'm watching on the sideline. There's barely a place for me anymore. I really know how it feels, and instead of maybe getting some empathy, I still only thought about me and needing everybody else to care. I'm sorry, George. I guess I got what was coming with this. That conclusion brought the disagreeable frown to George's face. He looked over the youngest through a narrow, serious gaze, but the firmness was found on affection. It was unmistakable. Then George wasn't simply a middle child. He was an older brother, all along and all his own way, and even when Nicholas couldn't see it, he always had been. Nicholas, no, you didn't. You were in elementary school, remember? Why should you be punished for that? Besides, you were not giving yourself enough credit. Me and Derek did what we wanted to do with your support. It's been years since you put your own feelings over ours. Going to college, moving out, growing up at different times, it brings separation. But abandoning you isn't what you deserve. And even if you did, I wouldn't be glad over it. It's happening anyway. I don't care about fairness. I'm biased. George's brow stayed pinched, but he lost the air of a teacher schooling their misguided students. The warmth of his affection was too apparent. Above all else, my family should get as much good as they can, even if it means they're spoiled sometimes. They should be spoiled.
Don't worry.
And that sentiment goes double for my little brother. Derek might have too, but don't forget either, Nico. You're the only one I've got in the whole world. Nicholas's tears went unwiped, and they were free to roll down his face while shouted as loud as his lungs could manage. I love you, George. When you decided to pick a college nearby, that was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It was great when we worked on those way too big puzzles together and play the weirdest games we can find.
Thank you.
I never want to lose that, even though I know you can't hang around here for the rest of your life. I want to keep coming back. I'm grateful every time you come through the door. Oh, it's a lot of emotions. And I'm starting to see blurry. George's lips trembled. His blinking was rapid. For someone as reserved as him, he was displaying it was a display of emotion no less than Nico's heartfelt declaration. I don't want to lose either of you. I don't want to lose you either. I love you. Sheepishly, George lifted his arms from his sides. It was a small, subtle gesture. He didn't even bring them all the way up, but he took the initiative to reach out. Nicholas didn't need any more of a sign than that. He bounded ahead and jumped into his big brother's chest. George's long-held fears of rejection were shattered for good. He took a second to get over the emotional and physical stun of Nicholas's hold, but as soon as George reciprocated, the two embraced one another fully, with nothing left standing in between. They were left in peace to have that. But once it was over, the two young men began to part. The piece missing from their brotherly bonding took a step forward. I'm sorry, too. The unexpected statement got immediate laughter from the recipients. George and Nicholas threw their heads back and stayed unified with arms over their shoulders. What did you even do? For those two, nothing was more of a joke than Derek. Mr. Responsibility, the perfect guest, swore as needed to apologize. Derek scratched the back of his head, accepting his turn as the third wheel. He might be awkward over butting in, but Derek absolutely meant what he said. I did way too much of the wrong thing and not nearly enough of the right thing. I'm the one who insisted on handling Nico all the time because I didn't want to ask for help because I saw myself as the only big brother of the family. My overinflated sense of importance and martyrdom is what took away any space for George. But that was only when I thought there was something I needed to handle. If everything was fine, I wasn't there at all. Too busy with school and practicing, trying to prove myself. Neither of you are to blame for how everything went down. I had to be demanding get my attention, or you had to stay out of my way.
I really
I
messed
should have
up.
been there more, but better, and let you have each other too. The least I can do is apologize. The eldest attempt at accepting responsibility was met with almost fatherly chastising from both his younger siblings. George was able to glance down at Derek the way he could do with one little brother, while Nicholas shook his head and let out a weary sigh. That's not true at all.
No.
Yeah, no way, Derek. I took demanding attention to a whole other planet. Sure, I was a kid, but that doesn't mean it was cool and easy to live with. You did the best you could, better than I would have if I had to be the responsible one. Can you imagine what a disaster would have been? We would have had to survive this long. The imagination brought Nico's gills back. It lifted a sad smile onto George's face. Not the only comment itself, but seeing his younger brothers happy, spoke sincerely to one another. Sincerely to his older
It's
one.
okay.
I need to say sorry as well. You didn't try to push me aside. You didn't have a chance to. I saw what I saw between you and Nico, and how you were so close. You had something that I wasn't part of. I decided entirely on my own to wait around for you both to come to me, while never attempting to be there for either of you. I should have made an effort for my family. You were there for me. George, and his calm presence, was one of a kind in his family. He was used to those around him being far louder. However, Derek and Nicholas' insistent yells still caught the middle son off guard. It was a full rejection of his earnest admission, but as much as George believed that about him, the refuting of it was a surprise to anyone else. Each brother viewed their own faults as the source of all the problems, while the others could barely see those shortcomings past the love they held for their family member. From end to end, the semicircle of Swor's smile began to spread. All right, we're all sorry, and none of us need to be. How's that?
Yeah.
That's great. It's great. The two spoke the same words, one after the other. Still linked together, Derek watched them swelling with pride. He got to call them his family, his brothers, and his friends. Perfect, but let's reframe what I'm saying. Derek had a grin, bright with confidence. He never looked more like the brother he hoped to be as he strode up to his little siblings. He clapped one hand on each of their backs, making a proper huddle among the trio, and started them both
I
ahead.
got you.
Nico, if you ever decided you were too big to need your older brother anymore and never wanted to see me, I'd break my heart. Please don't stop letting me be there as much as I can. Nico sniffled once more before nodding determined. George, you'll always be my co-pilot. I know you've been backing me up since we were kids, and you're welcome with me anywhere, anytime. Your presence is my pleasure. A dark red flush over George's face. He was too embarrassed to react with steadiness. Instead, he offered a shaky thumbs up in the center of the loop. It was true that George was Nicholas's reliable big brother, and he might have been the tallest of the bunch, but in front of Derek, you could never miss that he was also a little sibling. Letting out a bark of laughter, Derek gave the boys another smack across their shoulders, bones for good measure. Oof.
I promise.
And I promise that I'll always find a way to see you sooner or later, and when I can't be there in person, I'll call. We're never gonna lose touch. I love you, bros. Tightening his grip on their shoulders, Derek physically signified his vow to never let his brothers go. Nicholas responded by letting his head rest on Derek's solid arm.
Thanks.
Thanks, Derek. I can call too. Love you. Same for both of what you said. I'll call and I love you. Ah. He followed after Nicholas in more than words. George placed his cheek against the well-trimmed side of Derek's head. This time, with the full trio, the Swarsh brothers snuggled into a loving embrace. He looked on in relief. The tension hurt. The subsequent comfort had been easy, and he felt without participating. You felt entirely frozen, attention fixed on the three brothers until a nudging arm brought focus to your own situation. Liz was smirking at you. At some point, both of you had stood. You couldn't remember exactly when you got into your feet. In the spirit of sibling and affection, let me say, I appreciate being here with you, Eri. Oh, because it'd be even more awkward if I was stuck watching this scene by myself. She got jokes. I love you too, Lizzie said affectionately. My thoughts exactly. I think it's sweet. Wow, love you, sis, you tease. Wonder how much longer they'll go. Shh, don't interrupt. Gee, I should have known you'd be that protective. Geez, I should have known you'd be that protective of moments like these. I am. I like a sweet moment. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, remember to like. That way I know you're enjoying the content I'm making. Remember to hit subscribe. That way YouTube brings you back here to see what happens next, and I won't take up any more of your time. Hope you have a good day, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.